Hello and welcome back to our discussion on antitrust issues with regards to the sports industry. We left off last time talking about Major League Baseball's antitrust exemption, how it was established in 1922 within the case of federal baseball versus the National League, how it was challenged in the Supreme Court in Toulson versus the New York Yankees in 1953, and how the court said, well, based on stare decisis, we're going to allow Major League Baseball to continue with their Major League Baseball exemption. And if you really want to change it, you need to go to Congress to have it done. You need an act of Congress. So that's where we left off. Just before we begin, however, I want to let you know that the other major properties also have reserve a variation or similar reserve clause within their player contracts. The National Football League, the NBA, hockey, they all had some form of reserve clause within their player contracts. However, the difference is that the antitrust exemption does not apply to football, it does not apply to basketball, and does not apply to hockey. Major League Baseball is the only sport that has some exemption. In 1957, in a case called Ridditz versus the NFL, the Supreme Court came down and said, no, sorry, football, you do not get an antitrust exemption the way your brother property does, that being baseball. Same thing in basketball and hockey. So the only major league property that has an exemption is baseball. However, the reserve clause was preeminent through football, basketball, and hockey contracts as well. All right, challenges to the reserve clause. The next challenge to the reserve clause and to baseball's antitrust exemption came in the case of Curt Flood versus Bowie Kuhn. And the time was right for this challenge. All right, in 1970s, by 1970s, we're almost 50 years out from the federal baseball versus case. There is no doubt in anyone's mind at this time that baseball does have an effect on interstate commerce. There's plenty of media, both television and radio. There are newspapers. Teams have moved out west. We have teams in California, teams down south. So there's, without a doubt, no question that baseball has an effect on interstate commerce. So the time was right. Also, we're coming out of the 1960s, the civil rights era. It was a period of time where people were expressing their freedoms, their freedom to assemble, their freedoms, civil rights freedoms, a lot of democratic values, the right to work, equal protection for everybody. So the time was right in the 1970s when Curt Flood brought this case against Major League Baseball and their then commissioner, Bowie Kuhn. The question is, who is Curt Flood? Curt Flood was a baseball player. He played in the Cardinals organization, the St. Louis Cardinals organization, for approximately 12 years. He was a good baseball player. There's no doubt about it. He was center fielder, won Golden Glove on multiple occasions. Has a World Series ring. Was in two pennant championship teams. Lifetime batting average around 270, 297. So he was a solid baseball player for many years for the Cardinals organization. After the end of the 69 season, however, the Cardinals decided to trade Curt Flood to the then Philadelphia Phillies. Curt Flood didn't want to go. He was like, no, listen, I built my career here. I've been a Cardinal my entire career. I don't think you have a right after 12 years to just trade me without my consent, without my okay. And he was upset. He contacted the commissioner's office and asked the commissioner for help on this. The commissioner said no. That's the reserve clause. Your options are go to Philly or to quit. Those are your only options. Curt Flood decided, I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to go to Philly. I'm going to sue. I am going to sue Major League Baseball and challenge this reserve clause. However, Curt Flood could not do it on his own. He would not go to Philly, therefore he was out of contract. So therefore he wasn't getting paid. So he looked to the Major League Baseball Players Association, the newly formed Players Association, for help. And with the backing of the MLBPA, Curt Flood took on Major League Baseball and their long-standing antitrust exemption. When Curt Flood sues MLB, this case went from the lower court here in New York City all the way up to the Supreme Court. And MLB's argument in front of the Supreme Court was simple. They argued the same thing. They argued, the stare decisis, the case precedent from 1922 federal baseball, which was reaffirmed in Toolson versus New York Yankees. Supreme Court, you allowed us to run our business this way based on these court decisions. You can't all of a sudden change that on us. We set up our whole business model built around what you told us was legal. They also, one of MLB's arguments was that, you told the players to go to Congress to change the exemption or to get rid of the exemption. They never did. There's never been a bill in Congress to change this antitrust exemption. So the Toolson Court told them to go to Congress. Major League Baseball Players Association never went to Congress. Therefore, the reserve clause is still in effect, and our antitrust exemption is still valid. They also argued contract law. They argued that, Curt Flood, he signed a contract. Said that he's under reserve. He doesn't have to sign a contract. It's a privilege for him to sign this contract. A contract's a contract, and therefore Curt Flood has to abide by it. If he didn't want to abide by it, he shouldn't have signed it. They also argued they're now collective bargaining between the Major League Baseball owners and the newly formed Major League Baseball Players Association. And this is the proper place for this to be argued and the proper place for this to be negotiated is within collective bargaining. They argued that collective bargaining was the right place to discuss the issue of the reserve clause. They also argued, and interestingly enough, that they spend a lot of money in training players. All right, they spend a lot of money on the minor league system. That minor league system is to provide players with the opportunity to gain experience, improve their skills, improve their batting, improve their fielding. And that Major League Baseball owners spend a lot of money on this farm system or this minor league system. Therefore, when a player gets called up, they need a reserve so they can get a return on their investment. If the player just played for 1 year for the team and then went somewhere else, they wouldn't be getting a return, and therefore they'd be losing money. The reserve system is in effect, is there to help Major League Baseball get a return on that investment, that large investment they put in their players, training them, coaching them, getting them up to a place where they can play in the major leagues. All good arguments, all solid arguments, and this is what they presented to the Supreme Court. The MLBPA, or Flood's argument on the other side, were simple. They claim they took on the stare decisis argument. They said, well, there's been case precedent, federal baseball and Tolson, but times have changed. Interstate commerce. Baseball definitely has an effect on interstate commerce at this time. It is without question. They argued that yes, there may be past cases that allow baseball to have their antitrust exemption, but no. Now the Sherman Act needs to come in. This reserve is agreement between two or more parties. Baseball definitely has an effect on interstate commerce, and this reserve clause is anti-competitive. It's not outweighed by any pro-competitive aspect, by this return on this investment, by the contract issue. No. Times have changed. 50 years has gone by, and baseball definitely has changed. Therefore, precedence is not valid in this circumstance. They also argued, who cares the way they run their business? All right, if you change the law, they'll just have to reshape their model. Major League Baseball will just have to change the way they run their business. All right, it happens all the time. Courts make decisions. Businesses have to adjust to the court rulings. What's so different about Major League Baseball? With regards to Congress failed to act, well, they never brought it. They decided to. They never brought this issue before Congress. They decided to use the court system, and the Supreme Court has time and time again overruled itself on prior cases, and this is a time where they need to do it. The court has the same right. They do not need to go to Congress to change baseball's or take away baseball's antitrust exemption. And in regard to the contract issue, they said, well, yeah, Curt Flood did sign a contract, but it wasn't a valid contract. It was a contract of adhesion. There was no negotiations. It was either sign it or go away, sign it or retire. All right, it's typical basic contract law. It's a contract of adhesion. It's a unilateral contract. Curt Flood, like the other baseball players out there, do not get a right to negotiate. They should. Therefore, that contract's invalid because it's a contract of adhesion. With the collective bargaining and the return on investment, they said, well, yeah, baseball does spend a lot of money on training players, getting them up to a level where they can enter Major League Baseball. But so do other businesses. I mean, you're an attorney, you graduate from law school, you work for 2 years for a law firm, you gain some skills, you gain some knowledge, you gain experience. You can then move on to another firm for a lot more money. Your value has increased, right? A law firm can't come in and say, no, we need to keep you because we want to get a return on our investment. No, this is just typical business practice. Players, employees get trained and moved on. You have no right to return on that money that you invested. You hope that your employees will stay. And if you treat them right and you pay them right, they probably will. But you're not guaranteed that they will stay. And you're not guaranteed a return on your investment. But their strongest argument, I think, was this is America. Right? We're all built on capitalism. Right? The whole Sherman Act was premised upon cooperation and capitalism and innovation. And we don't want price fixing. We want good quality stuff. Innovation. We want to keep moving forward. That's what capitalism is about. Therefore, why can't I as a player capitalize on my skills? Why can't I as a player put my skills out there to the open market and get paid what I'm worth? Everybody else can. Other employees can. Why can't I? Why am I under reserve? Why am I in this perpetual contract? And this is what their argument was to the Supreme Court of the United States. Again, good arguments. Good arguments on both sides. All right? While this case was going on and battling its way through the courts up to the Supreme Court, the Major League Baseball and Major League Baseball Players Association agreed. Now, wait. This litigation is taking way too long. It's way too expensive. From now on, no more. We will agree through collective bargaining that any other grievances, any other disputes between the players and the owners will be resolved by binding arbitration. Okay, so while this case is pending, while it's moving its way up through the courts, through collective bargaining, the players and the owners agreed that future disputes will be resolved through collective bargaining. So when the Curt Flood decision came out, it upheld, based on stare decisis, upheld Major League Baseball's exemption. Curt Flood lost. Even though he had good arguments, even though times have changed, even though baseball definitely had an effect on interstate commerce, it didn't matter. The court said, no, we're going to base this decision on stare decisis. And again, if Curt Flood wants to change it, go to Congress. Well, because of this agreement that Major League Baseball had with the Players Association for any grievances to be arbitrated, 2 years later, two pitchers by the name, one by the name of Messersmith, one by the name of McNally, played out their option year and then decided to file a grievance stating that the reserve clause is invalid. They played out their 1 year. They played the 1 year under contract. They played out the reserve year. Now they have a right to test their skills and test their worth on the open market. Now, because both parties agreed to arbitration, this matter did not go back to court. This matter went in front of an arbitration panel. And from your readings, you'll know that one lone arbitrator from Fordham University, after hearing to all the evidence, hearing to both sides' arguments, pretty much the same arguments they gave in front of the Supreme Court, this lone arbitrator ruled, after sitting on the case for months, that no, the reserve clause is out. Both Messerschmitt and McNally played out that option here, and now they're free agents. Major League Baseball, not happy, ran back into federal court saying this lone arbitrator cannot overrule 50 years of precedence in the Supreme Court of the United States. And the court looked at MLB and said, yeah, but you contracted for arbitration. Weren't you in here a few months ago arguing a contract's a contract? Yeah. So you contracted for it, you need to abide by it, and you need to abide by the arbitrator's decisions. And that opened up the door for free agency. Still wasn't full free agency because both parties agreed that full free agency would just be devastating to both sides. Think about it. If everybody became a free agent at once, it would just increase the value for very few players but depress the value for most. It's basically supply and demand. So both parties' heads got clear and they decided on some form of free agency after a period of reserve, and that structure has changed over the years, but there's always a period of reserve before a player can become a free agent and test their worth on the open market. That way the owners get a return on their investment, and then the players can eventually get paid what they're worth. After the free agency doors opened up in MLB, the other major properties soon followed. With that, we now had agents come into play. Salaries rose, so did the number of agents, and just within 20 years, 30 years, there are over 800 agents in the NFL for 1,800 players, NFL players. So, it's amazing. Other issues regarding antitrust in Major League Sports. Now, Major League Sports have an exemption with regards to broadcasting. All right, in 1961, the Congress passed a bill called the Sports Broadcasting Act. This was enacted to allow the major properties to pool and sell their rights, their television rights, and sponsor telecast of games. Okay, up until then, each team had their own TV deal. TV was relatively new, so the Giants would have local television rights with NBC. Chicago would have local television rights with CBS, and everybody had their own television sponsorship deals, telecast deals. When Pete Rozelle became the commissioner back in the late 50s, he said to all the all the owners in the NFL, why don't we pool our rights and sell our rights as one body, as one force? Now, this seemed good for the smaller teams, the smaller franchises, the Pittsburghs, the Kansas Cities, the smaller franchises. Because their television contracts weren't all that valuable. Green Bay's was probably worth $75,000, whereas the New York Giants was worth $250,000. So, for the smaller market teams, this made sense. But for the bigger market teams, not so much. I mean, why am I going to pool my resources and possibly lose money? Why am I going to help my enemies? Why am I going to help my foes? Pete Rozelle, though, did convince the owners to do this, and just from not personal knowledge, but from what I read over the years, Wellington Mara, the owner of the Giants at the time, was instrumental in seeing that this was done. All right, Wellington Mara, the owner of one of the largest franchises, media franchises, the New York Giants, convinced the other owners, along with Pete Rozelle, that they should pool their resources together and sell their rights as one entity, that being the NFL. They would have more power. And the problem is, once they did this, it was a violation of antitrust. Okay? It was a contract between two or more parties. the owners of the NFL. Football at this time did have an effect on interstate commerce. There were teams throughout the country, played each other in different venues, media, sent signals, interstate. And this was anti-competitive. This was anti-competitive because if one network got the rights, all the other networks were foreclosed out. All right, so as opposed to the New York Giants negotiating with NBC, the Green Bay Packers negotiating with CBS, and everybody having their own deals with all the networks. Now, as one, if all those telecast rights went to NBC, CBS and ABC were shut out. So it was anti-competitive towards them. And the networks would have brought a lawsuit and probably would have won, except in 1961, Pete Rozelle and the NFL owners convinced Congress to pass the Sports Broadcasting Act, which allowed them to pool and sell their rights as one entity. Okay? Some examples of other antitrust violations: player drafts. Player drafts, the rookie draft. Is this a violation of antitrust? Well, think about it. The rookie draft, it's an agreement, right? It's an agreement amongst the owners. They agree that they will have this draft, right? The worst team will get to pick first, or some variation. They agree that it helps keep parity in the league. They agree that this is the best thing for the league, so they agree that the best players should go to the worst teams. That way, that team could build up, and there would be parity within the league. So the owners agree to this reverse rookie draft. Does NFL and the major properties have an effect on interstate commerce? Yes, of course they do. Is this anti-competitive or restrained trade? Yes, without a doubt. Because once that player is drafted, so let's say I'm drafted by the New York Giants or the Philadelphia Eagles, who can I negotiate with? I can only negotiate with the team that drafted me. Okay? So it's anti-competitive in regards to the players. They cannot put their services out there. If they just came out of college, they could have a bidding war for their services. And whoever pays them the most, or they wanted to play, they'd win. But no, with the player draft, that player, once drafted, is reserved by that team and can only negotiate with that team. So it's anti-competitive against that player. And the courts have said on two different occasions, in Denver Rockets versus All Pro Management, and in Smith versus Pro Football, both times the court held that, yes, the player drafts are a violation of antitrust. Same thing with salary caps. Are salary caps a violation of antitrust laws? Yes. Woods versus NBA said so. All right. Due to the salary cap that was in place at the time, Woods was drafted because only one team drafted him. They only had $75,000 of room under the cap. That's all they could pay him. So he felt that was a violation of antitrust. He should be allowed to get paid what he's worth. The court said, yep, we agree. The salary cap is anti-competitive, restrains trade, deflates salaries, and therefore it's a violation of the Sherman Act. The court, but not necessarily, because of a thing called collective bargaining. All right, once you enter into collective bargaining, and once both parties agree to certain terms, the rookie draft, salary caps, they are not considered violations of antitrust. They now get into the third exemption, which are the labor exemptions. And the labor exemptions we'll get into in the next week's module, and we'll show how antitrust and labor are at odds with one another, how labor laws, labor exemptions protect properties from antitrust suits. Okay? If you have any questions, comments, please feel free to reach out. You know how to get in touch with me, either phone call, email, or we can always Skype. Thank you.